Hello everyone, I'm Randall Mendenhall alongside Glenn Seeger on location at the Range Systems Studio. Before we begin, I've got some trivia for you, so check it out. Well, hello again, everyone. I'm Randall Mendenhall alongside Glenn Seeger on location here at the Range Systems Studio. I'd like to share with you the game plan for today. The webinar should last about 45 minutes, give or take, depending on how many questions we receive. And speaking of questions, here's how that works. You can ask questions via the webinar interface, and no need to wait until the Q&A at the end to ask them. So to do that, go ahead and click the triangle next to the questions section and type your question into the text box. Once you've entered your text, go ahead and click the paper airplane to send. Also, the slides will be available for download, and to get the slides downloaded, all you have to do is go to the handout section, click on the triangle, that'll expand it. There should be a link there to download the PDF. And lastly, this webinar will be recorded. The recording is usually available a couple days after the webinar, and that way you can go back and revisit the content if you'd like to. By the way, our next webinar is scheduled for Thursday, October 12th. Topic is, how do I build a home indoor shooting range? Well, our featured speaker today is Glenn Seeger, Government and International Sales Manager here at Range Systems. Glenn works with many of our law enforcement, military, and international customers, and is among the longest tenured employee at Range Systems. Glenn's topic today is top 5 problems and solutions with rubber bullet traps. Glenn, thank you for joining today.
Thank you.
All right, so the purpose of today's webinar is really just to provide a clear understanding of the common problems and their solutions with rubber bullet traps. In particular, we're going to speak on both granular rubber traps and block rubber traps. Are they perfect? No. All bullet traps have some sort of limitations. But in full disclosure, these problems that we're going to speak of are very rare and often completely avoidable. By the way, Glenn, what can you tell us about, or what can you tell the audience about our experience doing this?
Okay, well, Range Systems has been doing this for nearly 20 years. We've always been the rubber guys, and we're pretty passionate about rubber-based bullet traps. Today we have a block trap and a granular rubber trap, and we also have a steel bullet trap as well. So we have a full assortment of bullet traps. Our bullet traps, well, I've been involved with doing over 150 different installations of bullet traps in shoot houses. Products that we manufacture and have manufactured for all this time are used by elite militaries and LE agencies, commercial and home ranges all around the world.
All right, and I think another important characteristic of rubber is really to bring up the testing and certification process. What can you tell us about that?
Well, that's a great point, Randall. It's really a big deal. Again, Range Systems, this is all we do is ballistic rubber. And we spend a lot of time developing the product and a lot of money and time having it tested, both internally, tons of tests internally, and then external tests, and then independent test labs to verify all the tests and the pre-tests. And it's just important that you recognize as a range operator you want to believe in the product that you're buying. You want to know that it's not just Glenn or Randall saying it works, but independent test agencies that confirm that it works, and decades of real world performance.
Yeah, I think that's very important. And also I think it's important to note that for the purposes of today's webinar, we're really only talking about Range Systems rubber bullet traps. And I say that because there are a host of other manufacturers out there with varying price points and quality, but essentially it comes down to some are using different rubbers. And so you can see here in the image of a different type of rubber that was used for a block trap. It actually looks very similar to the Range Systems rubber used in this portable block trap, but you can see how it's just crumbling there, and in fact they had to use Range Systems block trap, portable block trap, to function as the primary bullet trap because it was imposter rubber there. And there's another picture there. So again, we're only speaking about Range Systems products for the purposes of today's webinar, and I think that is important to know. Well, let's get started on the content here, Glenn. Talk about problem number 1. Rubber bullet traps start on fire. What can you tell me about that?
Well, Randall, that's probably one of the biggest comments that you hear, or myths or whatnot. Yes, rubber bullet traps burn. Literally everything burns. But the reality is the fires are very, very rare on ranges. I mean, in all the time that I've been doing this, I've seen 3 or 4 fires that occurred in a range, and literally all of those were either identified immediately or shortly thereafter as a maintenance issue combined predominantly with a tracer issue. Just to be clear on it, a tracer issue is a incinerator round that has a flame that comes out of the back of it, used by the military to identify the direction of a bullet at night. You're shooting in the dark, it's hard to tell where it's going, and the tracers allow you to see a long line of red light going towards its target. So anyways, obviously a projectile that has that coming out of it is not the best thing to throw into any rubber trap or in any indoor range. It's just a hazardous product and doesn't belong. But to that point, fires are very rare in a range, and you just want to make sure that you're not allowing that into your range. Again, it's more of a military kind of thing, but because of the internet, sometimes people can get a hold of these things, and you just want to be upfront with your customers to make sure they're not using those, and you shouldn't have issues. The other one is regular maintenance. You need to have a clean trap. Keep that thing clean, do the maintenance, keep the floor clean, all of those kinds of deals. Just common sense, and you'll never have a problem.
Yeah, I think that regular maintenance point is very important there. All right, next problem. Problem number 2, rounds going through rubber bullet traps. What's the reality of that, Glenn?
That's just not really well, I guess in all my years of doing stuff, I've seen it once or twice, and in both cases, just extreme negligence on the maintenance. I mean, literally extreme. Granular rubber traps are just fantastic products. Taking all the energy out of a bullet, exclusively using the rubber granulate itself to stop it. I mean, the bullet hits the granulate and comes to a stop by tumbling inside it, and it works fantastic. I mean, literally, there's no steel interaction whatsoever, which is why the projectiles in a Gran trap are mostly whole when you take them out, which also helps to keep your range cleaner. So, the key thing is, since you're stopping the bullet with granulate depth, you need to make sure that your granulate depth is appropriate. And so in the instances I mentioned where they had a bullet go through the trap, I mean, literally, you could see shiny metal. You could see the back structure of the trap. And obviously, that's not the kind of solution you need to have. Gran traps need to be properly filled. If you have a hopper on your trap, make sure the hopper has granular rubber in so that it can do its job, self-filling the trap. If you have a Gran trap, periodically you need to go up there and make sure you're not troughing. Rake that out a little bit to make sure that you have a nice even coverage.
Yeah, and troughing, what would that, if we're looking at the photo here, what would that look like then?
Well, troughing, sometimes, let's say you shoot for in a commercial range perhaps, or an LE range, you're doing high volume testing, or perhaps you're doing some automatic weapons repeatedly over and over, and you're shooting into the same spot.
Just like that, okay.
Yeah, and so when you're shooting into a spot, because the granulate is loose, sometimes automatic weapons or heavy impact into an exact same area, you might start to move that granulate away and create a little bit of a hole. Again, it's not a problem. There's plenty of depth in a standard gran trap. Just that you want to make sure that you don't get too big of a crater and then reduce the overall depth of the granulate. And so just periodically, most commercial range guys, in the morning they'll go through, take a look at the trap, they'll scoop up any rubber that migrated down onto the floor, look at the hopper to make sure it's full, and if there's any troughing, they maybe push on it with a rake to make sure that you're nice and consistent. Really minimal, really quick, and effective, so that you don't have, a perceived problem like this.
Yeah, so you avoid that cratering. And this particular gran trap that we're looking at is in the Range System showroom. What's the depth on this, Glenn?
Well, we have a couple of different depths that we sell, and it depends on the caliber of rounds that they're shooting, right? And so the neat thing about, again, granular rubber traps is literally from a 22 caliber or a 9mm to, rounds such as that, all the way up to 50 caliber. We make a gran trap to capture those rounds safely. And really the difference primarily is the depth of the rubber. We reinforce the frameworks a little bit to handle the additional weight of the rubber and the future weight of the lead that builds up inside them that you collect from use. But mostly the depth of the granulate is what's doing it, right? So your granulate depth on a perpendicular measurement might be, well, I think it's maybe 22, and then on a like a 7.62 rated, and then when you get up to like your 50 calibers, you're probably going to be in that 26-inch depth, I believe, on that perpendicular measurement. Now, when you shoot that trap, now you're shooting more on the hypotenuse, if you will, the long leg of the triangle, where that depth is much greater.
Sure,
right? So
sure.
If you're 22 inches on the perpendicular, which you never shoot, on the hypotenuse, or that longer leg of the triangle, you're shooting at, almost 3 feet of ballistic rubber.
Yeah, the long part right here.
Yeah, and most of your handgun rounds, your 9s and your 40s and your 45s or whatnot, those typically tumble to a stop anywhere from 6 inches into the granulate to maybe 10, 12 inches. Your rifle rounds are going to go anywhere from 8 inches to, maybe 20 inches. And again, your rubber depth here is probably going to be closer to 3 feet. So you have plenty of room for that to be captured. And then your 50 calibers obviously go a little bit deeper, but we run with a deeper, better granulate to capture that.
Excellent. Well, let's move on to problem number 3 then. Rubber bullet traps require too much maintenance. What's the reality of that, Glenn?
Well, all traps require maintenance. Again, so we sell several rubber-based bullet traps. We also sell a steel trap. All of the traps require maintenance. On a lot of people do a granular trap because of the cleanliness part of it, right? Because you're encapsulating rounds that are generally whole. On our steel traps, they tend to get pulverized a bit more because you're hitting steel, and it's being redirected into a deceleration chamber and then ultimately collected in a bucket. But at the end of your day of shooting, and you walk up to the gran trap, put your hand in there, shuffle it around a little bit, and pull out some projectiles, you're going to have whole projectiles. Walk around to the back of the steel trap, grab a bucket, pull it out, take a look, you're mostly going to have frags in there. And so that's the fundamental, the initial thing that people make a decision on which trap to go is I'm looking at a cleanliness issue or whatnot. But to the point of this problem here, the cleanliness is one thing, but it's also a function of maintenance, right? So on that steel trap, you should be going in there daily, checking those collection buckets or the common collection point to make sure that you're not filling the bucket up. So you back the lead into the decel chamber, creating problems. Or in a grand trap, we talked a little bit about doing the checking it every day to make sure that you're not troughing, checking the hoppers to make sure that they're full, those kinds of things. All of them require maintenance, all of them require cleaning.
Yeah, let's take a look at a steel trap image there too, so we can kind of compare and contrast a little bit. What are we seeing here?
Well, here it's a common steel trap. It's kind of the V-shaped thing that you see. I'm not going to talk about the manufacturer here. This is not our bullet trap. But it shows up a problem that can occur, and it's just a function of maintenance. I mean, this is obviously a well-used range, and that bullet trap, if you look in the center of it there, you can see where the deceleration mouth, the mouth to the deceleration chamber, at the center point there is
right there.
Clogged full.
Yep, right there.
And so what's happened is the rounds bounce into the mouth of the trap, and then they work themselves into the deceleration chamber. They spin to a stop, taking the energy out, and the rest of the bottom and fall out. If a collection bucket below is not emptied, you'll fill up with lead, and eventually there's no place for the lead to go. And so then you start to create a massive nugget, and it closes up the chamber itself.
So what are we looking at in this inset picture then?
In the inset picture, you're seeing where, to try to remedy this solution, a field technician took and torched out an opening into the deceleration chamber from behind the bullet trap, so that they could get in there with an air hammer and chisel out the lead pieces and try to make a repair to that trap. This is an example of a steel trap that has gone too long without maintenance and inspection and just proper care. I mean, you can't fire millions of rounds into anything and not take a look at it.
Well, that's a valid point, and again, the importance of maintenance, regardless of the type of bullet trap that you have. It's important to make sure that that trap is maintained. Okay, let's switch to problem number 4 then. In terms of rubber bullet traps, we sometimes hear about a problem with bounce backs and bounce outs. What's the reality and the solution for that, Glenn?
Well, I'll say that just to start with, any and all bullet traps can have this problem happen. And again, it's not a real great concern. In the ranges, anytime you go to a commercial range or LE range or whatever, and you walk, obviously when the line of fire is not live, you walk down, you take a look at the floor of the range, you tend to find a little bit of projectile on the ground. And again, it can happen to any kind of bullet trap, because oftentimes the thing that causes it to occur is the shooter is not hitting the trap. Right, they're hitting the floor, they're hitting the sidewall, they're hitting the target carrier, they're hitting the baffle. There's a multitude of things they can hit, and then there's the multitude of reasons.
So that's what we're looking at here, right? Where they hit the floor.
Yeah, you can see some lines on the floor. They're hitting some things on the floor, and
there's
so
the bullet trap.
If you hit the floor of the range before you hit the trap, sometimes you're going to slow the velocity of the projectile down so far that when it hits the trap, whether it's steel or rubber, it might not stay in the trap. That being said, when it comes out, you're generally talking a pretty low velocity thing. I would say you're more apt to find projectiles on the ground with a steel trap, because that loss in velocity tends to be more noticeable on a steel trap. With a granular trap, it has to hit the rubber just right for it to not come in. But still, a common thing across, something that happens, not so much of an issue to be concerned about. There are things that you can do to minimize that, and chiefly try to get your shooter to hit the trap. And so use target hangers or adjust the hanger on your target system so that the shooter, regardless of their height and regardless of their shooting distance, is when the bullet goes through the target, it hits the bullet trap. an example would be if you have a 75-foot shooting distance, that's your target, your trap is 75 feet away, and you move that target to a position that's 10 feet from the shooter, right? And now you put a shooter who's, let's say, you know, she's, or he or she or the kid or whoever is shorter. Let's say they're 5 feet tall and they're shooting at a target that's only 10 feet away. When you look at the angle of that bullet, it's going to go through the paper target and it's going to impact the ceiling or the baffle long before it hits the trap, just because of the angle. And so in that application, to remedy a potential issue, you would take and lower the hanger by using, you know, we sell on our website the cardboard extensions that drop them down. Some of the manufacturers use where they actually adjust the hanger itself, so it's a metal rod that comes down. And so it's a function of what you're shooting and the distance. They'll change the hangers or use the bracket so that when you track the trajectory of the bullet, it's going through the target and it's, you know, directed towards the trap and not the ceiling or the floor. So there's that, and use the proper loads. If you have people that are doing their own loads, and I mean, a bullet has to have enough energy to get into a trap, right? You know, if you're going super slow, if you're going under 500 feet per second, it's just going to be more likely to bounce off of anything. So, you know, proper loads. And then, of course, you know, just as a standard thing, you always want to wear the proper clothing and eye protection and ear protection and range, just smart common practices.
Yeah, Glenn, I really like what you said there with that the height of the hanger on the target carrier there. I think that's kind of an important point to keep in mind, where all of the equipment on the range must work together, because you could believe that you had a problem with your bullet trap. However, it's being influenced by another component of the range there. I think that was a good point. All right, problem number 5 then, lead disposal. What can you tell us about that, Glenn? What's the reality of it?
Well, the fact is, again, all types of bullet traps, you have to dispose of the lead. It's just a function of doing business, well, in this line of work, right? The picture you see here is a professional cleaning a granular rubber trap. So, I mean, just like the steel trap, right? You need to do the maintenance on it. You need to extract that lead and dispose of it. In a granular trap, the procedure is generally you'll have a professional come in and maybe they do it at night, maybe they do it on the weekend or whatever day you're slow, and a few guys pull the rubber out onto the floor from the bullet trap. Then they run a machine kind of like you see that he's got there, and the machine is kind of a neat little vacuum system that vacuums the granular rubber up on one side. Then on the other side, it has an exhaust that propels the rubber granulate that it's picked up back into the bullet trap. So one side sucks up the rubber, the other side fires it back into the bullet trap. And because the lead is heavier than the granulate, the projectiles remain on the ground. So you'll see all the lead bullets on the ground by his feet. So after he cleans out all the rubber, puts it back in the trap, he'll be left with that the bullets on the ground, and he'll collect those, and those are then recycled. And so anyways, the disposal, again, it's a function of being in the range business. You've got to do something with that. Depending on the size of your range, the commercial guys that are high volume and running a lot of folks through their range, oftentimes, you know, once you get into the 10 to 15 lanes in a high volume range, the collection and disposal of that lead actually turns into a revenue source, right? When you are under that, when you're 8 to 10 lanes, your volume at a higher volume, you tend to be more of an offset cost, right? Because obviously the people that are in the business of professionally cleaning ranges get paid to do that. And what I'm saying is there's a value to the lead that you extract from your bullet trap, and that value, recycled value, can be used to offset the cost of the cleaning itself. So in smaller ranges with lower volume, it helps reduce the size of your bill from the cleaner. On larger high volume ranges, you actually come out ahead a little bit when the guy comes through and does the cleaning. But yeah, just a standard thing. Again, with the steel trap, same thing. You get the buckets of lead or the barrel of lead, and at some point you've got to get that recycled, and you'll hire a professional to come in and take that and recycle it and make sure it's handled properly so that you're in compliance with all the state and federal regulations.
All right, well, that concludes our problems and solutions here, but before we go, I want to, or excuse me, before we get into the question and answer, I want to talk about some additional resources, specifically the National Shooting Sports Foundation, NSSF.org. They have some great resources available for people who are conducting research. In particular, there you see a screenshot that I took of one of their reports where they talk about rubber or steel and really go into owner preferences for bullet traps. Again, nssf.org. They'll also help you with managing a range there on the website. There's definitely some good information there, and other things such as in terms of lead disposal, they can help you with an OSHA mock audit. And then on the business side, I think it's really neat that they offer links to experienced range consultants. Now, these range consultants typically have ranges of their own, and can help advise on putting in a range if you're at that stage where you're ready to kind of get more information and move forward. And then lastly, here at Range Systems, we also offer a range design guide where we kind of break down every component of the range and talk about each of those and how it all fits together in terms of range design and planning and construction. So Glenn, what should be some of the key takeaways for the listeners in our webinar today?
Okay, well, I think a couple of big deals are you want to engage with the shooting range provider sooner rather than later if you're looking at building a range. Or if you have questions on maintenance or upkeep or modification of your range, check in with a provider and they can provide some assistance for you. I think number two, being in the rubber business, just like to make sure you be aware of imposter rubber. You want to use quality, purpose-tested product. You can shoot anything, right? You can put a piece of carpet on the wall and you can shoot that, and then it's called ballistic carpet. Well, I feel the same way about a horse mat or a cow mat or a gym mat. Just because it's black and square and rubbery does not mean that it's been used in facilities around the world by elite forces. There's a big difference. And when you have a weapon in your hand and you're shooting into something, you don't want it to be the first time it's been shot. So use quality products. And I guess the third point is you want to make sure that you have quality references, right? So look into the testing stuff. So don't just take my word for it. Look into the testing, and also look into the users that are using those products, right? To make sure that you've got the best of all, right? I mean, you wouldn't go out and buy a car without doing some research, and you shouldn't buy a bullet trap without doing some research too. Lastly, whether it's steel traps or rubber traps or whatever, I know our deal here is about rubber traps. They're just common things that are, if you do common sense things, maintenance on your bullet trap, you're just not going to have problems.
Yeah, I think that's a good point, and I hope that our audience understands that we're emphasizing it heavily. Just that all bullet traps require maintenance, and it's just important to keep that important component of your range maintained.
Sure.
So, well, just a reminder as I clear off my highlight from the previous slide. In order to ask a question, we're moving here into our Q&A part of the webinar. And so thank you to everybody who's already submitted a question. If you haven't yet and you'd like to, go ahead and click on the triangle right here next to the question section. That'll open up the text box so that you can type your question in there, and click the paper airplane to submit your question. All right, so looks like we've got our first few questions here. First question is from Kyle. He goes, after how much time should you have the trap cleaned? I think there are a couple of factors in there with Kyle's question, Glenn, but what would you say for after how much time should the trap be cleaned?
Great question, Kyle. Really a function of use. I have customers that, again, use and the type of trap. If I have with a block trap, you require maintenance sooner than you do with a grand trap, and you know, I have people that have a trap for 6 months and are required to do work. So, for example, on a commercial range, extremely high volume, where you're just pumping people through in high volumes. A commercial range, you're probably going to be having to do some maintenance on that 6 to 8 month intervals. Probably the most common clean point for an average commercial range is going to be yearly. I've got lower volume and perhaps some LE ranges with more of a moderate use that are doing them every other year. So it varies based on the volume. And I'd say also a little bit on the rounds, right? When you do a variety of rounds into a granular rubber trap, you know, handgun and rifle or whatnot, you get a good utilization out of the media, where you get, because each of the projectiles tend to get themselves in there at different depths, and so you know, with a mix of rounds, you get I think the best utilization or the longest time in between cleanings. But people are always quite surprised, right, when they finally go out and they have them cleaned. They're always amazed at the pounds that come out. I mean, literally, you know, you can pull a Suburban out of a grand trap in weight. You know, thousands of pounds. Not uncommon to pull 5,000 to 10,000 pounds of lead, and so there's some recycle value you can get out of that. Good question, Kyle.
Yeah, good question there. And it looks like Keith had also asked a similar question. How can you tell when it is time to mine your bullet trap there? So very related to that.
Yeah, on how can you tell? Well, a little bit about time, right? So if start thinking about it at 6 months. If you're a high volume range where you're running people through all day long, every day, you know, then you're going to want to start taking a look at that thing around 6 to 8 months. The other way of looking at it is when you go to the trap, you know, whether you're poking in there with a rake or with your hand, to start to see what kind of whether you're getting nuggetizing, where you're a collection, when I say nugget, I mean a collection of bullets that are right around the sweet spot. So if you look right behind your target, at that position in the grand trap, you might get a collection of lead, and so you can feel that with a rake or with your hand or whatnot. You're getting close to needing to have that cleaned. If you wait too long, you accumulate so much lead in there that the bullet can no longer go into the granulate and tumble to a stop. I mean, if you go in an inch or two and you're hitting a nugget of lead, a conglomeration of bullets that are starting to meld together, it's time to clean. And you know, you have a professional come in and he'll pull all that out of there, and you'll be back to brand new again.
Well, then Kyle asked a follow-up question then. So is it better to use a round count instead of time? That's a very good question there,
Yeah,
Kyle.
that's a great question, and as a matter of fact, Range Systems is working with another professional, I should say, in the range business to bring a round counter to the market. One that actually that records not based on what people say they shot or what you record in writing that they come out, but actual listening to the bark of the weapon in the range, so we can identify when you're getting closer, rather than being more subjective with a rake or your hand checking the trap. So yes, that would be, in my mind, about the ideal way. The only thing, even then, you have a little bit of subjectivity, right, based on the number of lanes, right? Because they could be shooting always in one lane versus more spread across all of them. But I think that is a pretty ideal way of keeping track of when it's time to clean.
Yeah, you got to keep the whole bullet trap in mind,
yeah.
here, don't you?
Yeah.
All right, switching gears here, George asks, how do you determine rubber quality? We kind of touched on a couple of things to look for, but what would you say to George there?
Well, I guess first and foremost, I'd like you to buy from me. Well, you want to buy from a company that's reputable and doing in the business, right? So you don't go out and try to buy this stuff direct yourself, or don't try to buy it from a company that's in the business of doing range work. Because the important thing is that the size of the granulate matters. The cleanliness of the granulate, right? When you buy that granulate, you don't want to be getting bags that are full of fines.
Yeah,
right?
tell us more about this granulate quality here.
Well, the granulate that we use is very, very clean. We use it from a very specific a specific type of tire. The granulate is cleaned, its size. So, you know, we get the majority of the granulate in a certain size, not too small, not too big. If you use a granulate that's too large, you increase the likelihood of a projectile, you know, deflecting off of that. And too small, I think you get too dense, right? If you were to, for example, if you were to be shooting into all fines, so granulate rubber like sand, well, your density would be different, right? It would be more compact. When you use a granulate fill, let's say you're 3/4 inch, chips of that size are going to allow the projectile to go in deeper than you would with the fines. And that's what you want. You want that projectile to go in, tumble to a stop, and be done. Fines aren't a great thing. The other thing is with the granulate, you want clean relative to dirt, but also relative to primarily the steel belts or nylon belts. You want to keep that out of your bullet trap because these are recycled products generally. Sometimes during the recycling process, they might pull in some of those components that are part of a tire, right? Nylon belts or steel belts. And so a quality range provider will make sure that those aren't a part of your bullet trap.
Yeah, so to sum up, it's density, its size, its cleanliness, and its source. Those would be what you'd want to look for.
That's pretty key. And the easiest way to get on all that is make sure you're buying from a quality, reputable range company that can make sure you're getting the right product. It also gives you the longest life. There are rubber products out there, granulate products that are the wrong size, that are the wrong shape, that are from the wrong master material. I mean, they might be black and look like rubber or are rubber, but they're belting. You don't want that. You don't want the steel pieces in there. You want rubber that holds up to the impact. So anyways, just be sure to get it from a range provider.
All right, our next question comes from Jeffrey. What's the expected cost for services for a rubber grand trap in relation to a range's size? Is that something you would get from a range provider or really from the lead cleaning provider?
I'm sorry, is it about
The question was, what's the expected cost for services for a rubber grand trap in relation to a range's size?
Oh, for cleaning the trap, I guess I can't, that's not my area of expertise. Only to say in my experience in talking with range operators that the commercial guys that are generally 10 and above are making money during the cleaning cycles. The guys that are 8 to 10 are offsetting costs or breaking evens, and then the lower volume guys are they're paying for that service. I also have people that buy their own equipment and clean it themselves, and that's fine. That works as well. But I'm sorry, I can't.
That'd be a good question for one of those types of companies.
Yeah. I mean,
okay.
I could ballpark that, but I'd hate to mislead you.
Okay. All right. Let's move to our next question. All right, it comes from Detective Mike. I work for a law enforcement agency and have an indoor range looking at a granular backstop to replace an existing steel trap. We've been using frangible ammunition for years due to jackets being peeled from jacketed rounds and coming back at the shooters. Well, that's certainly not good. Using granular could allow us to no longer need frangible ammunition as well. Is that the case?
Well, you can use frangible in a grand trap. I mean, the nice thing about the frangible too, there's obviously the the big deal is it keeps the lead out of the range, right? And so it's kind of a popular thing now, or relatively popular thing for especially police departments to be using some frangibles. It's a little bit more expensive for the ammo, but it keeps you out of the lead game, and sometimes that's makes the range environment a bit more safe relative to ocean and other constraints. And then also you don't have to worry about the disposal and that kind of thing. Frangible rounds are fine to be used in a grand trap. I think it's probably a true statement that you're going to have less potential of the jackets bouncing back. And then, of course, as a frame of reference, right, that the type of steel trap you have, I think, dictates also, when you tend to get a potential for a jacket to come back at you like that, right? Like the old Venetian blind deals are, when you're more perpendicular to the shooter. And then, of course, the distance you shoot at comes into play. But anyways, the grand trap is fine to be used with it. It works just fine.
Yeah, and it looks like Charles had asked a similar question. Is there any benefit or drawback with using frangible projectiles with a granular trap? So looks like we've got several people thinking about the same thing.
Yeah, no, it should be just fine.
Yeah, Ross. Hey, Ross, how's it going? Good to see you. He's asking, is it common to see imposter rubber from other ranges when you go sometimes? I guess that kind of depends on which range you're going to, but as we showed in the picture, it certainly exists, doesn't it?
Yeah, I guess I've been doing this a long time, and so I'll get to ranges they're looking to upgrade or modify, and so I run into it. 20 years ago, we didn't have much competition that way, and we were kind of the thing. And then I think as the business model was effective and the customers were looking for more and more, then people tried to come in with products that aren't a horse mat and try to step in and deliver that product. And so yeah, they are fairly common, so much so that when with our military customers, we had to get ourselves set up with an NSN number and other ways so that our users would be assured that when they buy a ballistic rubber block, when their request goes to the purchasing person, that they actually get what they're asking for. Because I've been last year, and I was down at Fort Bliss. We were chatting. I was chatting with a range control guy, and he had skids of our rubber for maintenance on his ranges and live fire houses, and I saw he had a skid of some other product, and then he just said that's what I got when I tried to order it one time, and so it sits here. I don't use it, but he knows the difference. But anyways, yeah, it is fairly common. And you want to watch that. So again, buy from a reputable person and check their testing. When it comes to the quality of rubber, testing. When we work with architects and engineers to do whether it's a military project or LE projects, law enforcement projects, we try to stick with performance criteria. Performance criteria and proven tested is the best way to weed out imposters. Because if, again, the color and size and shape is not the way to do it. You got to prove by somebody other than just them saying, yeah, it works, independently.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. All right, our next question comes again from Jeffrey. How should ranges handle their gran rubber when it's outlived its lifespan? And maybe, Glenn, talking about the lifespan of gran rubber, that might be a good place to start. What exactly happens? Walk us through the lifespan, I guess, of gran rubber first.
Just think of this concept for a second, right? So if you have a gran trap, 100% of the stopping power is the granulate. And so in that, it's a beautiful thing. That trap should literally last forever, as long as you change the granulate out or clean the granulate, right? And so when your maintenance person comes out and does service on your range, he's pulling that granulate out, he's working it through with his machine, and he's putting the granulate right back in the trap. So during a cleaning procedure, most of that rubber goes right back in the trap. They probably top off with a few new bags of granulate to get you to the proper height, and you're good to go. Bullet's extracted, trap's back in business, and it's a beautiful thing. And they'll do that several times before you get to a spot where the granulate starts to get overly pulverized or misshapen or whatever. Again, also a function of buying rubber from quality rubber from a company that's in the business of selling it, well, a range company. But yeah, you'll get several cleanings out of it, and your the people that do the maintenance and the mining are experienced in telling you when it should happen. But basically, when you start to look at your granulate, and you're seeing that you're ending up with more fines or smalls than you should have, it's time to have something done. And the guys that, next time you have your range mined or cleaned, have them take a look at that, and they can take care of that. The other nice thing about a grand trap, so the media that you're using to capture it starts out 100% recycled, right? And so then you use it the second time, and it's 100% recycled. And you're using it, 3, 4, 5 times, 100% recycled. In the green world, that's a kind of a beautiful thing. The other thing that's a beautiful thing is granular rubber is pretty darn cheap, and so as a wear item, it's a nice thing to have, right? When you look at the cost of a brand new granular trap, right? Let's say as compared to a steel trap, that steel trap, just because there's a boatload of armor plate there, it's anywhere from 5 to 10 times the cost per linear foot. So picking a grand trap sometimes gets to be an easy choice.
Yeah, I can see that. All right, looks like we've got another question from Kyle, and this is for all the folks talking about frangible. What would the process of cleaning frangible bullet remains be, or would it, excuse me, I'll restate that. Would the process of cleaning frangible bullet remains be different than cleaning the lead out? Again, is that something we can answer, or is that something really for more of these disposal companies to answer?
We'd have to talk to a cleaning company. I apologize, Kyle. That's not what I do for a living. I do know that I have customers that do frange in their grand traps. I've not heard of issues that way. I'm happy to get you in contact with some people that do cleaning, and you can ask those questions of them, and they can tell you how that's handled. I'm sorry, I just don't. I'm not in touch with that.
Yeah, I think maybe we've got another webinar topic here with cleaning and maintenance of rubber bullet traps.
Good question, though.
Yeah, good question. All right, there looks like there's some of these that kind of repeated on what other people had stated. However, Tony Dill asks a question. He says, do you have any issues with ricochets or backsplatter with the 2-inch Dura panels and AR500 steel? What can you tell us about that? Looks like we're talking more about panel and block now for rubber.
Yeah, well, when you have let's say it's a sidewall in a range or whatnot, you have a Dura panel attached to that armor plate. We have that in our own range.
Yeah, right there.
Yeah, in our range, and literally you can walk right up to that range and right up to that sidewall and blast right into it. In my 15, 16 years in the range business here, I have never had a round come out of that rubber. And we've done some pretty crazy testing with our stuff to try to intentionally blow things up and wreck it and over volume and overshoot and all that. And I've never had an issue where a round comes out of a Dura panel. I have users around the world, military users on SF compounds. It's a beautiful product. It is the safest way to treat a sidewall. Even if you don't have the armor plate behind it, putting that Dura panel on a sidewall virtually eliminates. Mathematically or theoretically, I assume there's a possibility with a projectile to do something, but I've never seen that or heard of that. But anyways, it's a great way to make that sidewall safe of the splatter and the ricochet and the redirection. Or the concrete spall, right? If you put a Dura panel and glue it directly to the sidewall, you shoot that concrete sidewall, you're going to get a spall out. You put a Dura panel over it, you shoot that sidewall, you won't even be able to tell you hit it. So,
yeah, and exactly when you're using the Dura panel and Dura block according to their specified caliber rating, how exactly does that work with the rubber there? from a physics standpoint? The bullet enters the rubber, what happens?
Yeah, so really what the Dura Panel is designed to do, it's designed to let bullets go through it. So with the standard Dura Panel at about 2 inches thick, when you shoot that, the projectile goes through the rubber. Slight reduction in velocity as the bullet goes through the rubber, as the rubber grabs at the side of the projectile, kind of like when you're slamming on the brakes on your car. Your rubber tires are dragging against the asphalt or the blacktop. The bullet's doing the same thing for a short time and then goes through. The rubber closes behind it.
Self-seals, right?
Self-seals behind it, and then the projectile hits the substrate behind it. If it's armor plate, that bullet's just going to frag, and all of that frag will be trapped behind the Dura Panel and in front of the armor plate. If it's concrete, the concrete will spall out a little bit, and both the concrete spall and the lead frag will be trapped behind the Dura Panel.
All right, good question. Well, it looks like we have received immediate feedback from Charles about cleaning would be a good follow-up webinar. So appreciate the feedback there, Charles. Kyle, Jeffrey, Ross, Tony, Keith, George. It looks like we've made, and of course Detective Mike, looks like we've made our way through I believe most of the questions here, and there were a couple of overlaps, so if I missed one, I apologize. Feel free to go ahead and reach out to us. In fact, I'm going to leave you with Glenn's contact information here as we wrap up our webinar. So thank you again to everyone for joining today, and Glenn, thank you for presenting on top 5 problems and solutions with rubber bullet traps. By the way, again, I'll just repeat, our slides are available for download. The recording will be available later. We do post them up on YouTube and on our website, so if you want to catch the recording in its entirety that way, you can also do that. And then we've got Glenn's contact information there, his email and his phone number, and it looks like we've got some more webinar topics coming your way, specifically next month on Thursday, October 12th. We've got How Do I Build a Home Indoor Shooting Range. Glenn, thanks for presenting with me today, and thank you to everybody who joined.
Yes, thanks for joining us. We appreciate your time and interest, and anything we can do to help you guys, please reach out to us. Enjoy your day.
All right, thank you, everyone.